We were all ready for a break. Finals were looming, and the pressure of our last year of college weighed heavily on us. That's why when Jake suggested a weekend camping trip in the mountains, it seemed like the perfect way to unwind. It would be our last adventure together before we scattered to different corners of the world. The group consisted of the usual suspects: Jake, the confident leader of our little pack; Sarah, his girlfriend, who always had a knack for sensing when something wasn't right; Mike, the skeptic who never believed in anything supernatural; and me, the reluctant follower, always tagging along even when my gut told me not to. The first few hours of our hike were uneventful. The air was crisp, and the views were breathtaking. We laughed, joked, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the stress melting away. But as the sun started its descent, we realized we hadn't found a good spot to set up camp. Jake insisted we push on a little further, confident we'd find something soon, and then we saw it. A small, weathered cabin nestled between the trees, its wooden exterior worn by time and the elements. It wasn't marked on any map, but after hours of hiking, it seemed like a blessing. We approached cautiously, the unease settling in the pit of my stomach growing with each step. The others didn't seem to notice, or if they did, they ignored it. Jake was the first to push open the door. Inside, it was surprisingly well maintained, almost as if someone had been living there until recently. The furniture was simple but functional: a table with 4 chairs, a threadbare couch, and a fireplace with a stack of logs nearby. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, their subjects staring out at us with blank, lifeless eyes. "This is perfect," Jake declared, dropping his pack by the door. "We'll stay here tonight and head out in the morning." Sarah hesitated, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to piece together an unseen puzzle. "I don't know, Jake. This place feels off." "Come on, it's just an old cabin." Mike scoffed, already making himself comfortable on the couch. "You're just being paranoid." Despite Sarah's reservations, we all agreed to stay. The sun was setting and none of us wanted to be out in the dark. We gathered around the table, ate a quick dinner from our packs, and tried to ignore the creeping sense of unease that hung over us. As night fell, a low humming noise began to resonate through the walls. At first, we thought it was the wind, but the sound was too steady, too rhythmic. It vibrated through the floorboards, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," Jake replied, his bravado faltering. "It's probably just the wind or something." But it wasn't the wind. The noise persisted, growing louder as the night wore on. We decided to ignore it, convincing ourselves it was nothing to worry about. We unrolled our sleeping bags and tried to get some rest. That's when the dreams started. I was back in the cabin, but it was different, darker, more decayed. The air was thick with the stench of rot, and the humming noise was deafening. I wandered through the rooms, my heart pounding in my chest, until I found myself in front of a door I hadn't noticed before. It was the basement. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a staircase that descended into pitch blackness. I felt an overwhelming urge to go down, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. I took a step forward, then another, until I was swallowed by the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs a man stood, his back to me. He was tall and gaunt, his skin pale as death. His head turned slowly, and when he faced me I saw his eyes, black voids that seemed to pull me in. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words over the hum. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to me, and I felt a cold, clammy grip around my wrist. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. The cabin was silent, the humming gone, but the unease lingered. I glanced around the room and saw that the others were awake too, their faces pale and drawn. "You guys, did you dream about the man?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. We all nodded, the fear in the room palpable. Mike tried to laugh it off, but his eyes betrayed his fear. It was just a nightmare. We're all just psyching each other out. But it wasn't just a nightmare. We all had the same dream, and that wasn't a coincidence. The next day we decided to explore the cabin more thoroughly, hoping to find an explanation for what was happening. We split up, each of us taking a different room. Sarah and I took the living room, while Jake and Mike checked out the bedrooms. As I was inspecting the fireplace, Sarah called out to me. She had found a small locked door hidden behind a bookshelf. We pried it open with a crowbar we found in the corner, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. It was the same staircase from my dream. We descended slowly, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, the basement was just as I had seen it, dark, damp, and filled with a sense of dread. Against one wall there were stacks of old camping gear rotting away from years of neglect. In the center of the room there was a table covered in dusty journals. We started going through them, our hands shaking as we flipped through the pages. The journals belonged to previous visitors, all of whom had stayed in the cabin and experienced the same things we were going through. The last entries were all the same: pleas for help, desperate scribbles about being trapped, and warnings not to fall asleep. The cabin. "It's alive," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "It feeds off our fear. That's why we're all having the same dreams. It's trying to break us down." Jake and Mike joined us, and we shared what we had found. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. We were trapped. No matter how far we hiked, we would always end up back at the cabin. The more we panicked, the stronger its hold on us became. "We have to stay calm," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can't let it get to us." But it was too late. The cabin had already started to feed off our fear, and its grip on us was tightening. We decided to leave immediately, hoping that if we didn't give in to the fear, we could break free. We packed our things and set off into the woods, determined to put as much distance between us and the cabin as possible. But no matter how far we hiked, the cabin was always there, waiting for us. We tried different directions, even marking trees to make sure we weren't just going in circles, but it didn't matter. The cabin was always there. By nightfall, we were exhausted, both physically and mentally. We had no choice but to return to the cabin, our spirits broken. That night, the humming was louder than ever, vibrating through the walls and into our bones. The dreams returned, more vivid and terrifying than before. The man in the basement was waiting for us, his black eyes filled with malice. This time he spoke clearly, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "You cannot escape." I woke up drenched in sweat, my body trembling. The others were already awake, their faces pale with terror. We didn't speak, but we all knew what we had to do. We went back to the basement, hoping to find something, anything that could help us escape. We searched through the journals again, looking for any clue we might have missed. And then we found it. A single page, torn from one of the books, hidden under a stack of rotting backpacks. The page contained a ritual, a way to break the cabin's hold. It required a sacrifice. One of us had to stay behind, giving themselves to the cabin so the others could go free. The silence that followed was deafening. We all knew what it meant, but no one wanted to say it. We stood there, each of us waiting for someone else to volunteer. Finally, Jake stepped forward, his face set with determination. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "I got us into this mess. It's only fair I get you out." "No, Jake," Sarah protested, tears streaming down her face. "We'll find another way." But there was no other way. We all knew it. We performed the ritual, our hands shaking as we recited the words from the page. The cabin seemed to shudder as the final words were spoken, the humming reaching a deafening crescendo before abruptly stopping. Jake stayed behind, his face calm as he watched us leave. We didn't look back, afraid that if we did, we'd never be able to leave. The cabin disappeared as soon as we stepped outside. We hiked for hours, the fear of being pulled back lingering in our minds. But this time the cabin didn't reappear. We made it back to civilization, our bodies and minds battered, but alive. We never spoke of what happened in the cabin, and we never returned to the mountains. Jake's sacrifice haunted us, but we knew it was the only reason we escaped. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that low humming noise, vibrating through the walls of my apartment. It's faint, barely audible, but it's there, a reminder that the cabin is still out there, waiting for its next visitors. We'd all heard the stories. The locals called it the Whispering Wood, a forest that had supposedly swallowed whole villages and travelers alike. There were rumors of voices in the dark, of people who ventured in and never returned. But we were young, cocky, and desperate for an escape from the grind of our daily lives. So when Alex suggested a weekend camping trip deep in those very woods, we laughed off the warnings. It was just a legend, we told ourselves, a ghost story to scare kids. There were 4 of us: Alex, the ringleader who never backed down from a challenge; Julie, always eager for an adventure; Sam, the skeptic who needed to see everything with his own eyes; and me, Tom, the one who usually kept us grounded, though this time even I couldn't resist the allure of a weekend away. We set out early, the sun barely cresting over the horizon, our backpacks heavy with supplies. The deeper we hiked into the forest, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of wildlife faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that settled over us like a shroud. The trees towered above, their gnarled branches intertwining to blot out the sky, casting long, twisted shadows on the forest floor. By the time we found a clearing suitable for our campsite, the sun was already dipping low, casting the woods in an eerie golden light. We set up our tents, built a fire, and settled in for the night, our laughter echoing through the trees as we told stories and roasted marshmallows. But as the darkness closed in around us, the mood shifted. The fire's warmth seemed to retreat, leaving a chill in the air that hadn't been there before. It was then that we first heard the whispers. At first, it was so faint that I thought I'd imagined it. A soft murmur like the rustle of leaves, just on the edge of hearing. I glanced at the others, but they didn't seem to notice, so I pushed the thought aside. It was probably just the wind, I told myself. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to circle our campsite, coming from all directions at once. Julie was the first to mention it. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Hear what?" Sam replied, poking the fire with a stick, the flames crackling in response. "The whispers," she said, her eyes darting to the darkened tree line. "It's like voices." Alex laughed, though it sounded forced. "It's just the wind, Jules. We're in the middle of nowhere. Of course it's going to sound creepy." But Julie wasn't convinced, and neither was I. The whispers were becoming clearer, more distinct, as if they were forming words. It was hard to make out, but I could swear I heard something like, "Leave before it's too late." We tried to ignore it, forcing ourselves to focus on the warmth of the fire and the comfort of each other's company. But the whispers wouldn't be silenced. They grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like they were right next to us, just beyond the flickering light of the flames. "Maybe we should call it a night," I suggested, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. "We've got a long hike back tomorrow." The others agreed, relieved to have an excuse to retreat to the safety of our tents. We doused the fire, the darkness rushing in to fill the void, and zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags. trying to block out the unsettling sounds that continued to whisper through the trees. I don't know how long I lay there, staring up at the dark canvas of the tent, listening to the whispers that seemed to seep through the very fabric. They were clearer now, forming words that I could almost understand, but not quite. It was maddening, like trying to grasp a thought just out of reach. At some point I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew I was jolted awake by a scream. It was Julie. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, heart pounding, and rushed outside. The campfire was dead, the clearing lit only by the pale light of the moon. Julie stood in the middle of the campsite, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "Sam's gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's just gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Alex demanded, stumbling out of his tent. "He was right here." But Julie was right. Sam's tent was empty, his sleeping bag tossed aside as if he'd left in a hurry. Panic surged through me as I scanned the surrounding woods, the shadows deep and impenetrable. "Sam!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. There was no response, just the whispers, louder now, swirling around us like a malevolent wind. We searched the campsite, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "What the hell is going on?" Alex muttered, his bravado crumbling. "This isn't funny, Sam." But Sam didn't answer, and the longer we stood there, the more I realized he wasn't going to. We gathered in the center of the campsite, huddled together like frightened animals. The whispers were relentless now, their words clear and unmistakable. "Leave before it's too late." "We need to get out of here," Julie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But as we prepared to leave, something stopped us. Sam's voice calling out from the darkness. "Wait," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "I'm here." We spun around, searching for him, but the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Sam, where are you?" Alex shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "I'm here," the voice repeated, closer now. "I'm fine. Just come to me." Julie's face drained of color. "That's not Sam," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "That's not him." "What are you talking about?" Alex snapped, though I could hear the fear in his voice. "It doesn't sound right," Julie insisted. "It's like something pretending to be him." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right. The voice was off, just slightly, but enough to send a chill down my spine. It was too smooth, too controlled, like someone imitating Sam's voice but not quite getting it right. "Come on," the voice urged, almost pleading now. "Don't you want to find me?" "We're leaving," I said, my voice shaking. "We're not playing whatever game this is." But as we turned to gather our things, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices all speaking at once, overwhelming, suffocating. They were in our heads, in our bones, urging us to stay, to give in. And then we saw him. Sam stepped out from the trees, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight. But it wasn't Sam. His eyes were dark, empty pits, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His mouth twisted into a grotesque smile as he stepped closer, the air around him growing colder with each step. "Don't you want to stay?" he asked, his voice echoing with 100 others, layered and discordant. "We can be together, forever." We backed away, the horror of what we were seeing paralyzing us. This wasn't Sam. This was something wearing his skin, something old and malevolent, something that had been waiting for us in the dark. "We have to go," Julie whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "Now." But it was too late. The thing that had been Sam moved faster than we could react, closing the distance between us in an instant. It grabbed Alex, its hands like claws, pulling him into a cold, suffocating embrace. "Help me!" Alex screamed. but there was nothing we could do. The whispers grew deafening, drowning out his cries as the darkness closed in around him, swallowing him whole. Julie and I ran, the forest a blur of shadows and fear. The whispers chased us, hounding our every step, urging us to stop, to give in. But we didn't. We couldn't. We ran until our lungs burned, until the trees began to thin, and the first light of dawn broke through the canopy. But even then the whispers didn't stop. They echoed in our minds, a constant reminder of what we'd left behind. We stumbled out of the woods, collapsing onto the side of the road, gasping for breath. Julie was crying, her body shaking with sobs. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was over. But the truth was, I wasn't sure it ever would be. We were found by a passing car, the driver taking one look at our pale, terrified faces and calling the police. We tried to explain what had happened, but our story was met with disbelief. Sam and Alex were never found, their disappearances chalked up to the dangers of the wilderness. But Julie and I knew the truth. We knew what we'd seen, what we'd heard. The forest had taken them, twisted them into something else, something that still whispered to us in the dead of night. And as I sit here, writing this, I can still hear those whispers, faint but insistent, calling me back to the woods, back to the darkness. Come back, they say. It's not too late. But I know better. I know what waits for me there. So I'll ignore the whispers, try to drown them out with the noise of the city, the company of others. But deep down I know that they'll never stop, and I'll never be free. I had always wanted to spend more time with Emma. She was 16 now, and I knew our days together were numbered. College would take her away soon enough, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to connect before she moved on with her life. That's why I suggested the camping trip, a weekend by a remote lake, just the two of us, away from everything. Emma wasn't thrilled about the idea at first. She was glued to her phone and preferred the company of friends to her old man. But she agreed, probably out of a mix of curiosity and a sense of duty. I was determined to make it a memorable trip. The first day was perfect. The lake was a mirror of tranquility, reflecting the dense surrounding wilderness. We spent the day fishing, hiking, and sitting by the campfire, telling stories as the sun dipped below the horizon. Emma laughed at my exaggerated tales of childhood mischief, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were really connecting. As the last light faded and the stars began to speckle the sky, Emma grew quiet, staring out at the darkening tree line. "Dad, do you see that?" she asked, her voice low and uncertain. I followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the thick woods, the tall pines swaying gently in the breeze. "See what?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Over there, near the trees," she insisted. I thought I saw someone. I squinted into the darkness but saw only shadows and the occasional flicker of movement as a breeze stirred the leaves. "It's probably just your imagination," I said with a chuckle, trying to ease her nerves. "We're the only ones out here, no one else for miles." She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the tree line, unease still evident on her face. I dismissed it as nerves, or maybe just the unfamiliar setting. I didn't think much of it. That night, after we turned in, the forest was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that presses down on you, making every tiny sound seem amplified. I tossed and turned in my sleeping bag, trying to find sleep, but my mind kept wandering back to Emma's words. Had she really seen something? Sometime past midnight I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching the leaves outside our tent. My eyes snapped open, my heart pounding. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps were unmistakable, circling our tent with a sinister patience. Emma must have heard it too, because she nudged me, her voice a fearful whisper. "Dad, wake up. There's someone out there." I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking, and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty campsite. The footsteps stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unnerving. "I don't see anything," I whispered back, though the hairs on my neck stood on end. I stepped out of the tent, the flashlight sweeping across the trees, expecting to catch a glimpse of some late-night wanderer or, more likely, an animal. But there was nothing, just the empty woods and the unsettling quiet. Reluctantly, I crawled back into the tent, trying to reassure Emma. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Probably just a deer or something." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. There was something out there. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a primal instinct screaming that we weren't alone. The next day, the feeling of unease hung over us like a cloud. Emma was quiet, her eyes darting nervously to the tree line every few minutes. We decided to stay close to the campsite, but the tension was palpable. Even the simple pleasure of fishing felt strained, as if we were just going through the motions, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't until late afternoon that we found the symbols. We were gathering firewood when Emma spotted the first one, an odd, jagged mark carved into the bark of a tree. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a crude symbol that looked almost like a twisted, elongated figure. We found more of them as we searched the area, each one more disturbing than the last. The carvings were deep, the wood splintered and raw, as if someone had gouged them in a frenzy, and then we found the drawings. They were scattered around the campsite, etched into the dirt, drawn on large, flat rocks, and even scratched into the bark of trees. All of them depicted the same thing, a tall, faceless figure with long, spindly limbs standing among the trees, watching. My stomach churned as I stared at the drawings, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I turned to Emma, trying to keep my voice calm. "We should pack up and leave." She didn't argue. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. We quickly packed our gear, the urgency of the situation pushing us to move faster than we thought possible. As we started down the trail, the woods seemed to close in around us, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their shadows long and menacing. But no matter how far we walked, the trail seemed to stretch on endlessly, looping back on itself. After what felt like hours, we found ourselves back at the campsite, the remains of our campfire still smoldering. Panic set in. We were lost, hopelessly, impossibly lost. We tried different paths, different directions, but each time we ended up back at the campsite, the symbols and drawings seeming to mock us. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, I knew we were running out of time. The figure, the one from the drawings, wasn't just a figment of our imagination. It was real, and it was getting closer. I tried to stay calm for Emma's sake, but the fear was clawing at my insides. We were being hunted, and I had no idea how to protect us. As dusk fell, I noticed that Emma was no longer by my side. I called out to her, my voice cracking with desperation, but there was no answer. I searched frantically, retracing my steps, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw it, the flash of her red jacket through the trees. I ran toward it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but when I reached the spot, Emma was gone. Instead, I found one of the symbols carved deep into the tree, fresh and raw, the wood still bleeding sap. "Emma!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the woods. There was no response, only the oppressive silence of the forest. And then I saw him. The faceless figure stood at the edge of the clearing, its body impossibly tall and thin, its skin smooth and featureless. It had no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just a blank, expressionless face. Yet I could feel its gaze on me, cold and unrelenting. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. The figure moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate, closing the distance between us. "Stay away!" I shouted, raising the flashlight as if it were a weapon. The beam of light fell across the figure, but it did nothing to stop its advance. And then it was gone, disappeared into thin air as if it had never been there. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. But the fear, the terror that gripped me, was all too real. I turned to run, but the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing closer, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I could hear footsteps behind me, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, but every time I looked back, there was nothing there. I ran blindly through the woods, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to find Emma. I had to save her. But the forest had other plans. No matter how far I ran, how hard I tried, I couldn't escape. The trees twisted and turned, leading me in circles, back to the same clearing, the same symbols carved into the bark. And always the faceless figure was there, just out of sight, watching, waiting. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I collapsed to the ground, the weight of despair crushing me. Emma was gone. I had failed her. As the last light of day faded, I heard a sound, soft, almost imperceptible. It was Emma's voice, calling out to me from somewhere deep in the woods. "Dad." I stood up, my legs shaking, and followed the sound, desperate to find her. The voice led me deeper into the forest, the trees growing denser, the shadows darker. "Dad, help me." I broke into a run, the voice growing louder, more insistent. But as I reached the source of the sound, I realized too late that I had been led into a trap. The faceless figure stood before me, its body towering over me, its blank face inches from mine. I tried to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear as the figure reached out with long, spindly fingers. It touched my face and everything went black. When I woke up, I was alone in the clearing, the symbols carved into the trees all around me. Emma was gone. The campsite was gone. Even the lake had disappeared, replaced by an endless sea of trees. I don't know how long I've been here, wandering through the forest, searching for a way out. Time has lost all meaning. The faceless figure still follows me, always just out of sight, always watching. I can feel it getting closer, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. I know it's only a matter of time before it catches me. And when it does, I'll disappear, just like Emma, just like all the others. If anyone finds this, if you're reading these words, stay away from the lake. Don't come looking for us. We're already lost.